A big problem with most of Breath of the Wild's bosses were that most of them were either too similar, too easy, or too forgettable in general. Tears of the Kingdom, however, fixed most of the problems with these bosses. There's a few duds here and there with some of the easier overworld bosses, but for the most part, they're pretty great. So let's rank them. I'll be ranking every main boss, mini boss, temple boss, overworld boss, and the final boss from worst to best, all 19 of them. There will obviously be spoilers for Tears of the Kingdom and the story and the bosses. And what I define as a boss is something that has a giant health meter at the top of the screen. So Lionels will not count because they are regular enemies, and neither will the monster forces, because even though they do have a meter, it's just the cumulative health of all of the monsters, so those will not count. With all that out of the way, let's rank these bosses. At the bottom, at number 19, we have the Sludgelike. And this boss, to me, is easily the most annoying and, it's here, the worst boss in the game. It's not really easy or really hard, but it's just annoying enough that you will die to it probably once or twice, but there's no reason that should happen. It's also really similar to the regular likes, so there's no reason for it to be a boss and the rest of them aren't, but I also don't like the likes in general. I think they're pretty annoying enemies, so I would steer clear from this boss if I had to, but you don't. It's mandatory if you do the Zora quest, and it's only there to show off Sidon's ability. They could have done it in a completely different way. Bring him down to the sewer and put some sludge there or something, or just not fight this boss. I hate it a lot. And I don't know, I can't even fathom it or put it into words. I just don't like this boss. It's the only boss probably I would never want to fight again. The rest of them, sure, why not? I would like to fight some more than others, but this one is definitely dead last of all of these bosses. Up next we have the little Unobo fight, which is just a glorified cutscene. The only purpose of this fight is to get the mask off of him, which could have been done in a regular cutscene, and it would have changed just about nothing. I do like it a lot more than the Leg because it's not annoying and terrible like that one, and the player really doesn't do anything. You hit him 3 times and that's it. He's really weak. I don't know, this boss, it was just probably something nice they wanted to throw in. It's kind of cool, I guess, to fight one of our allies, but there's really not much to it, but it still leagues better than the Sludgelike, without a doubt. The Frox, in my opinion, is there to solely provide a grander sense of danger when going into the depths. And, the Frox is a very easy boss. You can theoretically beat it in a 1 cycle, although it is a bit tough if it hits you off. But the first time you fly into the depths and you can't see a damn thing, and you see that Frox health bar appear on screen, that, makes your heart drop. So it's good for an initial jump scare, I guess, at the beginning of the game. But, as you go on, sure there are harder variants, but obviously you get stronger, so it's really pretty easy. The only time it could pose really a threat is at the beginning when you first see it, because you probably won't have any bombs to, shoot into its mouth. But once you get enough items and, and better weapons later on, it's a complete afterthought of a fight. I put the Molduga here at 16, and to be completely honest, I don't know too much about this fight. I think I only fought 1 or 2 back in Breath of the Wild, and that was when I first got the game, and I actually technically have not beat one in Tears of the Kingdom, just because when I fought it, I got bored and left, which says my opinion about this fight. It's fine, but it is kind of bland. So yeah, I have not beat the boss, which, take that as you will. If you don't respect my opinion for that, go ahead and flame me in the comments if you really like the Molduga. But I guess it's a completely suitable boss. I can't say much about it because I'd be a hypocrite, so I'm just going to put it down here as, okay boss. I'm going to talk about numbers 15 and 14 right now because they are 2 very similar bosses, and that is the High Nox and the Stall Nox. If I had to, I'd put the Stall Nox probably at 14. I like the design a bit more, but there's not much of a difference between them, and it's because these bosses are just very simple. It's not much to them. You can easily exploit their weaknesses, and they don't pose too much of a threat. And kind of like the Molduga, they are returning bosses from Breath of the Wild, but there are other returning bosses later that are from older games that got a new design, new mechanics, and the Molduga and the High Nox and Stall Nox did not get that. They are the same fights as before, which I guess is fine because they weren't bad, but they're suitable for what they are. There's better overworld bosses that we'll get to, but they're just, they're okay fights. There's nothing much I could say about them other than they're fine. Alright, this is what I consider to be the last boring overworld boss, take that as you will, and that are the Flux Constructs. Now these bosses are fine. They're intended to be the first boss you fight on the game because the first one is found on Tutorial Island, so they're a very simple fight because you get them so early, but they are pretty common. If I had to guess, these would definitely be the most frequently appearing boss in the game, just because there's multiple of each level. There's 3 different stages, and they are somewhat important because they are the bosses of each of the labyrinths that return from the first game. And I do like these. They can be pretty difficult, especially when you first fight it on the Great Sky Island. That attack where it brings the cubes down and throws them at you can one-shot you. It's pretty tough. So these are good. They are a solid boss, and definitely, in my opinion, a very big gap between this and the Hinox. Even though, yeah, the Hinox is an original, I think the Flux Construct is handled a lot better. Plus, it makes use of your abilities, because you can recall a block up to it. You can ascend when it goes up into the sky. You're supposed to use Ultra Hand to move it and get all the blocks, spread out. So I think this boss is very good because it utilizes your new skills. It's very early on, but it also appears a lot, and it gives some pretty good rewards, Zonite charges, devices, and some pretty good fuse items as well. Here at number 12, I have the Talus, and you might be thinking, Matt, you just said you were done with the boring overworld bosses, and I am, because I quite like the Talus. The regular and the Igneo and the Frost Taluses are fine, they're decent fights. Now they're a bit easier because you can ascend through them, but the reason I have them this high compared to these other bosses is because of the Battle Talus, which I think is a very cool variant of an older boss fight. See, this is what I wanted to happen to the Hinox and the Molduga, something new that changed up the fight enough but still kept the basic format of it, and that's perfectly what the Talus does. It makes things a bit tougher because it does add new enemies on top who have bows, sometimes explosive stuff, and it's supposed to be tougher, and I really like this fight. It's still pretty easy because you can go into bullet time, rocket shield, something like that. You can ascend through the platform, just take out the enemies, and then it's basically just a regular Talus. But there is still that, more sense of challenge, and it's a fun fight nonetheless, no matter how easy it is as you progress. But once you first start, I ran into one pretty early in my playthrough, almost as soon as I got off the Great Sky Island, and I lost to it a few times, just because, when you first get there, it can be challenging with multiple enemies and then this big, moving boss. So this was a very welcome addition to the game, and something I wish that other bosses got as well. Now at number 11, we have our first temple boss, and that is Muktarak of the Water Temple. This fight is fairly fun, but it is also pretty easy. It makes a good use of Sidon's ability, but if you have some hydrants, you can really easily cheese this fight. If you just put them on a table or something and just keep it spinning, then on a wheel, and you keep it spinning, it'll just get rid of all of it, so it's kind of easy, but it's fun to beat the shit out of the little guy, so that's pretty cool. And his second phase, although interesting, doesn't add much, just more goo, so doesn't really change up the fight if, like I said, you're cheesing it. But the shark's cool, I guess. That's probably the best part of the fight, I'll be honest. It's just kind of middle of the road. There's nothing necessarily bad about it, but there's not much I can say good about it either. So I think it's a very good, middle tier boss. Up next, we have another temple boss, and that is Guerra of the Wind Temple. I really like this boss mainly because of the atmosphere and aesthetic of it, because the fight itself is pretty easy, and that is intentional, I'll give it that. The game clearly pushes you towards Rito Village first, so the game intends it to be the first temple boss you fight, so it's not supposed to be anything special. But there are 2 ways to beat it, which I always enjoy when there's multiple intended ways, I guess, to beat the boss, where you can either, in Guerra's case, shoot it with arrows on the bottoms, which will take 3 hits, or dive through it, which will instantly get rid of the discs. So that's really cool. And the aesthetic of it, the flying ship with the other ships around it, and a giant snowstorm is really cool. And the fact that the fight does not take place on the ground, it's only in air. So you will never be on the ground. It makes things very different compared to other fights. So I appreciate it for kind of the risks it takes and how different it is. But I do have to knock it down a bit because of that difficulty, although I look past it in most cases. In the grand scheme of things, a lot of the bosses higher than him are good because of how hard they are, or at least pose somewhat of a threat. Now, I know I said earlier that I didn't like Unobo's fight because it was only 3 hits to beat, and just kind of a boring fight. And I stand by that, but this next fight, while also taking 3 hits, is very interesting in what the player is allowed to do. Miragia, I think that's how you pronounce it, something, is also a 3-hit fight, but you get to fly around on a plane and shoot Unobo at them. That was really fun. In fact, I contemplated putting it in the top 5 even for this list, because when I first fought it, I liked it so much. But yeah, I realized that, yeah, it's a good fight, but it's very easy and will likely be done in less than a minute once you see the wing. So there's not much to it. Although I think it would have benefited greatly if maybe once you broke the 3 heads that started, a bigger one came out of the center and it takes like 5 or 6 hits to defeat. That would be awesome. It would be top 5 easily, maybe even top 3. And it's cool that, you get to fly around the volcano, get some scenic views while also bombing the heads. So overall, this fight is very cool for what it is, but there's just too little of what makes it good to, make me feel like it deserves to be at a higher spot. But like I said, if it was longer, it would definitely be much higher on this list. The third temple boss we'll be talking about is the Marbled Goma, and I was really happy when I saw the Goma return. It's been a while, so it was fun to see him in a new light and with new mechanics like I was talking about earlier. The fight is very fun, but kind of like the other things I've said on this list, it is kind of easy. I'm not a fan of how you only have to break one leg for it to drop with Unobo, because that kind of defeats a lot of the purpose. You can one cycle the first phase, so that's something I would have changed. I would have made it so you have to break 2 or 3 legs to make it a bit longer, but there are actually 3 different ways to do this fight. You could break the legs as intended, you could shoot the eyes, which takes a really long time, but you can do it, or you can recall the rocks that he throws at you. So there's a bunch of ways you can go about this, similar to the Guerra fight, which is always a plus for me. If there's this game is great at not having one direct and set way to solve a puzzle or defeat an enemy, and this boss is definitely one of the biggest remarks of that. It really shows that you could do anything in this game, and there's a bunch of different options to destroying it. So like I said, I would have made it a bit harder with needing to break more legs, but it's also really funny seeing Unobo roll on the ceiling, just go all the way up, like the Simpsons movie. So it's always a good time. The final overworld boss we'll be talking about is the Gliac. And the Gliac is again another returning fight from actually the very first Zelda game, and it made some subsequent appearances, but this is its first time in a while, and I'm pretty sure its first 3D appearance. And these fights are great. There's 4 different variations of the Gliac: lightning, fire, ice, and the king one, and all 4 play similarly with their respective elements except for the king, who uses all 3. And these fights are great. Fighting a giant dragon is nothing but cool, and they're pretty menacing early game. There's so many clips I've seen of people going to the Bridge of Hylia with, 6 or 7 hearts and getting one shot by one of the Gliac's beams. So they're pretty tough early, but once you get enough stuff and you get a good idea of how to play the game, they are pretty simple. If you get into bullet time, even without key size, you can easily just hit all their eyes and stun them and get easy damage off, and keep doing that until the end, where it forces you to go really high up in the air. So they're definitely, most bosses obviously get easier over time, but I feel like there's a big drop off. As soon as you get somewhat decent with a bow, these bosses are kind of like nothing. The hardest one is definitely the King Gliac because of its gloom abilities. So if it hits you, if you don't have, things to bring you gloom health back, that health is gone for the entire fight. But, these are still very good bosses. The only thing I would have changed is give them different attacks, give each one a different attack, instead of just kind of reskinning each attack to match the element of that Gliac. Maybe give each of them something different. I just think that would be a bit more interesting. But that's really my only gripe about them, because I do get that difficulty drop off. It was obviously bound to happen. So, very solid bosses. Basically, the only original story boss from Breath of the Wild is back, and he is a lot better than before. Master Coco in the first game, in my opinion, was pretty lackluster. For him being the only original main story boss that wasn't some form of Ganon, I thought he would be a lot better and not just played for comedic relief and the sort of serious role he had. He was a mandatory fight if you were doing the Gerudo quest, so I thought they would have made him a bit tougher, because this fight is pretty not hard at all. But his fights in this game definitely make up for it. There's a lot more. He only had 1 in the first game and he has 5 or 6 in this one. And while none are really hard, they're all cool. Each fight has him piloting a different vehicle, and you have to use your surroundings and items that the game gives you to beat him. One of my favorites is the boat one, where he's on the water. You can either get your own boat, make it, or once you hit him off the first time, you can hijack his, and then he'll get another one. So that was one of my favorite fights. The mech one's cool, and the plane one is great too. And I feel like they struck the perfect balance with him. He is not a mandatory boss in this game, unless you want auto build, but you don't have to fight him. And I think he strikes the perfect balance of comedic relief into what is otherwise a pretty darker game compared to his original. So I think Coco is very good in this game, much better than he was in Breath of the Wild. And the only reason I'm putting him here is because I think the bosses ahead of him are just better fights. Basically from Coco onward, I really like all these fights. I don't really have complaints about them. It's just they're all good bosses, and I had to decide which ones I personally enjoyed the most. And while I did like all of Coco's appearances, and I always did have a chuckle when he was on screen, these fights ahead of him I did enjoy more. Before we get on to the top 5, I would like to ask you to please like and subscribe. It helps me out a ton and allows me to make more videos like this. And also comment your top 5 bosses to see if we agree or not. Maybe we'll get into a conversation in the comments section. So technically I lied when I said the gliac was the final overworld boss we'll be talking about, because I didn't mention Phantom Ganon, who is technically an overworld boss but is also a story boss. And both fights are different, but I'm both putting them here at number 5. The overworld fight makes you have to beat the stupid ass hands to spawn a Phantom Ganon, and it's only one of them. But in the story fight in Hyrule Castle, there are 5 of them, and I prefer that fight much more. I really like the multiple bosses, things like that, you know, specifically in this Phantom Ganon fight, and it is appear later on, but we'll get to that. And I like how you get the sages, so it's like a 5-on-5 battle, and it seems pretty even. And the difficulty is just right, because it's not like there's 5 enemies going right at you from all sides. Not all of them attack you, and like I said, the sages are there, and they're usually keeping at least 1 or 2 busy, so you only have to worry about 2 or 3 at most. You never really have all of them on you. So this is a very fun fight on a story level, like I said, with that 5v5, and the events it takes place with you realizing that this Zelda was evil the whole time, and you seeing Ganon since the beginning for the first time. And like I said, that 5v5 is just great, and we'll get into that more later in this top 5. Dark Beast Ganon in Breath of the Wild felt like a cutscene, and it was not interesting at all. Definitely one of my least favorite bosses in that game. And another problem I had with it is that it didn't feel earned. This is the 6th form of Ganon you fought in Breath of the Wild up to this point, and the other 5 were basically the same fight, but all bad. I don't like the Blights or Calamity Ganon, and the Dark Beast did not rectify any of my problems with them. But the Demon Dragon in Tears of the Kingdom is a pretty good fight. You know, they're both examples of a stunt climax final boss that isn't incredibly interactive, but is there kind of for spectacle. But I think that the Demon Dragon does things a lot better. First of all, the environment, you have much more control over it, you know which eye you go to at each time instead of the set, order. Riding on a dragon is a lot cooler than riding on a horse in my opinion, but I think a lot of people share that opinion. And the setup for this fight is a lot better. We know about draconification in the game, but we don't know Ganon's gonna use it. But as the cutscene starts happening of once we beat Demon King, where the wheels are turning in our head and we're like, wait a minute, is he gonna do what we think we're doing? And he does. He actually eats the tear and becomes a dragon. So this idea was set up, and unless I'm not remembering correctly, we don't know, we never hear Dark Beast before we fight him. And sure, Ganon's shown as like a pig in a lot of different games, but Dark Beast I feel like is just there to be there. I feel like the Demon Dragon is earned, and it works perfectly as that climactic boss fight. So I think this is a great boss, but this is only the Demon Dragon, not the Demon King. We'll get to the Demon King in a bit. These next 2 picks may be a bit controversial just because I don't really hear anyone talking about these bosses, but at number 3 I have the Seized Construct. Now, I'm not a biggest fan of this game's abilities, and I know a lot of people aren't either, just because you have to walk up to the characters instead of just having it on a menu where you just have to press a button. I get that. But I think Mineru is definitely my favorite because it makes the most sense to have to go up to, and also it's just really cool. You get a mech and you can attach any Zonai device to it. That's pretty awesome. But the reason I like this fight so much is that it perfectly utilizes that ability. If you don't want to take gloom damage, which I assume most of you don't, you have to be on the mech. And there are parts in the arena that allow you to get a cannon or a shocker. And it's a very even matchup. That's another thing I like with bosses, is when it's sort of even. And this, you have the same mech. You guys have the same abilities. So I think the Seize Contract is a very great fight because it utilizes what you're given so perfectly. And, the story behind it is, alright, Mineru trying to create a construct but then failing. That's fine. But the majority of the reason I like this fight is because of how balanced it is and just how cool it is. It's a mech fight. Like, that's awesome. My second favorite boss is Queen Gibdo. Now, when I first fought this boss, I raged a lot. I died quite a few times, and I was not happy with it. But upon thinking about it more and revisiting it by fighting it again in the depths, I realized that this fight is actually pretty fun. The first phase is simple, you just need Riju to shock the queen to deal damage, but the second phase is where I really like it. You have to fight her like normal, but there's also 4 towers spawning Gibdos, so you kind of have to split your time. Would you rather just go for a bunch of damage on the queen and risk being killed by a Gibdo because those deal a lot of damage, or do you want to make it safer for you by destroying the towers, which does leave you vulnerable for a bit until you destroy it? Because the towers, when destroyed, leave a beacon of light, which does make the Gibdos be able to take damage, and the same for Queen Gibdo, so she can run into it. So it's kind of a, you have to choose, you have to make a decision that will benefit you, and you have to keep your awareness up. If you're just going for the queen and a random Gibdo comes and kills you, that's completely your fault. And you gotta watch out for the queen or a sand shred when you're destroying the towers, because, most likely you're watching Gibdos at that point. And then once you destroy a tower, you kind of get rewarded with a little bit of safe space. No Gibdo can come in and get you because they'll get stopped right on the outside. And so I like how unique this fight is and how there's a good strategy to it, but you really have to divide your time right and how you think is going to be the best case for you to win this fight, and I really like that. And at number 1, what did you expect? Obviously the best boss in Tears of the Kingdom is the Demon King Ganon fight. The first phase is simple. You get to know Ganon's attacks, you get a feel for the fight. He'll change his weapon so you'll know what he's going to do later on. But then once you take down that first phase, he transforms into the true Demon King, and you watch as the health bar slowly goes to the other side of the screen, revealing how much health he has. And when you first see that, your heart drops. You're like, what? Like, how is this? How does he have so much health? How am I going to beat this? And, you get flustered, and it brings back that 5-player mechanic, as I said I liked earlier with the Hyrule Castle Phantom Ganon fight. You have to fight 4 Demon Kings clones and the regular one, but you do get the sage. So again, it's like a 5-on-5, even though you have 6, but it makes sense, it's worth it. And they're constantly changing weapons throughout. And then once you beat that phase, it's just a simple one-on-one between you and Ganon, and that part is also very fun. Just an overall fantastic fight all around. A big thing I like about this fight is how menacing Ganon is. He hasn't been the most threatening or the most scary villain in a while, but you definitely see here with how confident he is that you're gonna lose, and how powerful we see him become when all that health, shows up. You realize, okay, this is a real fight. Like, obviously it's a real fight, but this is serious. And obviously the cherry on top is that Ganon can perfect dodge you and flurry rush, and he can even double perfect dodge you, which is great. And that kind of leads into, like I said earlier, I like when fights are balanced and even, and this fight is very balanced. Ganon has a bunch of similar abilities to you do. He can switch weapons just like you. He has a bow. He can charge attack. He gets a lot of health. He basically heals himself. So I think that it's a very balanced and good fight. One of my favorite boss fights in really any video game in a while, and I think a perfect final boss fight for this game. I think I have nothing bad to say about this fight. It is definitely my favorite fight in the game, and I think that the devs nailed it with the Demon King fight. And that is all the Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom bosses ranked. I hope you all had a good time and enjoyed yourself. Don't forget to like and subscribe, like I said earlier, helps me out a ton, lets me make more videos. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.